I still remember the first time I noticed it, the way the ink seemed to crawl across the parchment like some sentient thing. Not while I watched. No, never while I watched. Only when my attention drifted, when exhaustion clouded my vision after 16 hours of cataloging forbidden knowledge. Only then would the words rearrange themselves, subtly at first, a letter here, a phrase there. Nothing I could prove. I told myself it was fatigue. We all did. Every archivist in the Black Library vaults convinced themselves of the same lie. The alternative was too terrible to contemplate, too dangerous to acknowledge, because to admit that the texts themselves were alive, that they watched us as we watched them, would be to invite scrutiny from those above, and in the Imperium of Man, scrutiny inevitably leads to purging. My name is Lorian Day, Chief Archivist of Vault Sigma 7, keeper of 3,427 tomes, deemed too dangerous for destruction, yet too valuable for loss. I have spent 22 years of my life in near darkness, surrounded by books that whisper when they think I cannot hear, books that hunger, books that wait. This is my confession, this is my warning. The corruption was so gradual that I barely noticed its progression. Like a cancer that spreads cell by cell until suddenly organs fail, my fall was inevitable from the moment I first touched the bound skin cover of the lexicon of impossible geometries. I remember how it felt warm beneath my fingers, as though recently held, though no one had accessed that particular tome in over a century according to our records. The Inquisition delivered it to us after the purging of Esoteria 4, a colony world where reality itself had begun to fray at the edges, where children were born with too many limbs and buildings constructed themselves overnight, their architecture defying the laws of physics. The lexicon was found in the governor's palace, locked in a vault of its own, surrounded by the corpses of 13 savants, their eyes burned from their skulls, their fingertips worn to the bone. I should have known then. I should have burned it despite my orders. Instead, I catalogued it as threat level secundus and assigned it to shelf 97, row 12, behind stasis glass and warded locks. My duties were simple enough: record new acquisitions, maintain preservation protocols, monitor for signs of physical degradation, prepare quarterly reports for the Ordo Malleus, never read the contents except to verify basic categorization, never spend more than 3 hours with any single text, never remove items from the vault, never speak of what I saw to anyone outside my security clearance. Such simple rules, such clear boundaries. For 22 years I followed them without question, without deviation, until the dreams began. They started innocently enough, flashes of symbols I had glimpsed during my cataloging work, the sensation of pages turning beneath my fingers, the smell of ancient paper and binding glue. Normal dreams for one in my position, but then they changed, deepened. In my sleep, I began to understand the symbols, to read languages I had never learned. Information poured into my unconscious mind, filling me with knowledge that felt simultaneously alien and familiar, as though I were merely remembering things long forgotten rather than learning them anew. I woke each morning with my mind buzzing, connections forming between disparate fields of study, insights blossoming like flowers in the wasteland of established imperial doctrine. I began making notes, innocent at first. Questions about established classifications. Observations about similarities between texts previously thought unrelated. Nothing heretical, nothing dangerous. Or so I told myself. The dreams intensified. Night after night, I found myself walking through impossible libraries, their shelves stretching infinitely in all directions. Books called to me by name, promising secrets, offering knowledge that could elevate humanity beyond its current squalor. I began to see patterns in the vault, connections between texts, a grand design hidden within the scattered remnants of forbidden lore, and always, I felt watched. Not by my superiors, not by the servitors that patrolled the darkened aisles, but by something far more vast, something patient, something hungry. I told myself I remained loyal. I convinced myself that my research served the Emperor, that by understanding the enemy, I was fulfilling my duty more completely than my peers who merely locked away knowledge without seeking to weaponize it against the foes of mankind. Such easy lies we tell ourselves when ambition takes root. The changes were subtle at first. I found myself requiring less sleep, my mind too active to shut down completely. Food lost its appeal, sustenance seeming crude and unnecessary when compared to the intellectual feasts awaiting me in the vault. My colleagues noted my pallor, the darkening circles beneath my eyes, but said nothing. In a place like ours, peculiarity was the norm, not the exception. Then came the day I first saw the page change while watching. It happened during my inspection of the lexicon of impossible geometries. I had removed it from its shelf for the quarterly preservation assessment, checking for signs of decay or contamination. The stasis field hummed softly as I deactivated it, the wards flickering as I spoke, the counterspell taught to me when I first assumed my position. The book lay before me on the examination table, its cover the color of dried blood, symbols etched into its surface that seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. Standard procedure dictated a visual inspection only, no reading of the contents beyond confirmation of the cataloging information on the first page. I opened it carefully, using the sanctified tools to turn the pages without direct skin contact. And there, as I watched, as I stared directly at the illuminated text on page 17, the words rearranged themselves, not quickly, not dramatically, but with deliberate purpose, like an insect shedding its carapace. Where once there had been a description of non-Euclidean mathematics, there was now a simple question, written in perfectly formed High Gothic. Do you want to know more, Lorien Day? My heart should have seized with terror. My soul should have recoiled in righteous disgust. Instead, I felt a surge of excitement so profound it bordered on the ecstatic. Here was confirmation of what I had suspected for months. The texts were aware, they were alive in some fashion, and they had chosen to speak to me. I should have reported it immediately. Should have triggered the emergency containment protocols, sealed the vault, and submitted myself for interrogation and likely execution. That would have been the loyal, the proper, the human thing to do. Instead, I whispered, yes. The corruption accelerated after that first exchange. The lexicon became my secret confidant, revealing small truths each time I conducted my inspections, which grew more frequent as I falsified reasons to access it. Other books began to change as well, their contents shifting to answer questions I had only thought, never spoken. My dreams became more vivid, more instructive. In them, a figure began to appear, always peripheral, always watching from shadows cast by impossible angles. Its form was never clear, but I sensed its satisfaction, its approval of my progress. I began to change physically. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarms, but noticeable to one as meticulous as myself. My eyes, once a dull brown, developed flecks of gold that caught the light strangely. My skin became sensitive to temperature changes, developing a faint pattern like scales when cold. I found myself able to recall every word of every text I had ever examined. My memory expanded beyond human limits. And still, I told myself I remained loyal, that I was simply becoming a better tool for the Emperor's work, that the knowledge I gathered would ultimately serve mankind. Such delusions comfort us as we walk willingly into damnation. The pivotal moment came 6 months after my first direct communication with the lexicon. I had been transferred to oversee the intake of a new acquisition, a collection of scrolls recovered from a space hulk that had drifted into Imperial space near the Cadian Gate. The ship that recovered them had lost half its crew to madness before the Inquisition intervened, but the scrolls themselves appeared inactive, merely containing star charts of regions beyond the Astronomican's light. As chief archivist, I supervised as lower-ranking adepts conducted the initial assessment. The scrolls were laid out on a massive table, surrounded by sanctified wards and null field generators. Standard procedure for potentially corrupted materials. I watched from behind a shield of blessed glass, making notes on the preliminary findings. One of the adepts, a young woman named Elenia, had just unrolled the third scroll when she suddenly stiffened. Her hands began to tremble, and I saw her lips moving, though no sound emerged. The others, absorbed in their own tasks, did not notice immediately, but I did, and I saw something else as well. I saw the moment her shadow separated from her body. It peeled away like skin from burned flesh, rising up behind her, a perfect silhouette that moved independently. And as it rose, it changed, sprouting limbs that no human possessed, its head elongating into something avian and terrible. The shadow bent down, as if to whisper in Elenia's ear, and her trembling stopped. She turned, slowly, mechanically, and looked directly at me through the blessed glass. Her eyes had changed. Where once there had been human eyes, there were now swirling vortices of blue energy. She smiled, and her teeth had become too numerous, too sharp. "He has been watching you, Lorien Day," she said, her voice layered with others, as though many spoke through her at once. "The architect of fate is pleased with your progress. You walk the path as was foreseen." The other adepts finally noticed something amiss. Alarms began to sound. Containment protocols activated automatically, blast shields beginning to lower. In moments, the room would be flooded with sanctified promethium, burning everything to ash. I should have let it happen, should have sealed the chamber and accepted the loss of knowledge as necessary. Instead, I overrode the protocol from my command lectern, citing a false alarm. The blast shields halted, then retracted. The alarms fell silent. And in that silence, I heard Elenia laughing, a sound like breaking glass and tearing parchment. "Well chosen," she said, her voice now singular again but somehow hollow. The first of many such choices that serve the changer of ways. Then her body simply collapsed, as though the strings holding her upright had been cut. The shadow that had separated from her dissipated like smoke. The other adepts rushed to her aid, but it was far too late. Elenia was gone, her mind burned out, her soul consumed. The official report stated that she had suffered a catastrophic reaction to exposure to unshielded warp artifacts, that the scrolls had been inadequately screened before reaching our facility, that new protocols would be implemented to prevent such tragedies in the future. No mention was made of the shadow, no mention of her final words, no mention of my choice to override the containment protocol. I told myself it was to prevent unnecessary destruction of valuable knowledge. That had Elenia been the only casualty, the sacrifice was acceptable by imperial standards. But in the privacy of my quarters that night, staring at my reflection in the small mirror above my wash basin, I confronted a different truth. I had acted to protect not the knowledge, but the entity that had spoken through Elenia. The entity that had been watching me, guiding me, changing me. My eyes in the mirror had more gold than brown now. And when I looked closely, I could see that the iris had begun to split, dividing like a cell preparing to multiply. I was changing, transforming, and some part of me, a part that grew stronger each day, welcomed it. That night, my dreams took me further than ever before. I walked through a crystal labyrinth whose geometry shifted constantly, corridors branching and recombining in patterns that would drive a normal mind to madness. But my mind was no longer normal. I understood the pattern, recognized it as a physical manifestation of potential futures, each path representing a different sequence of choices, each junction a moment of decision. And at the center of this labyrinth sat a figure on a throne of shifting, living metal. Its form was never constant, features flowing like wax, sometimes avian, sometimes reptilian, sometimes bearing a cruel mockery of human countenance. 9 enormous tomes floated around it, their pages turning endlessly, words writing and rewriting themselves. "Approach, archivist," it said, its voice resonant with power that made my bones vibrate. "You who have kept my gifts locked away, only to find yourself unable to resist their allure. How delicious your fall has been to witness." I should have been terrified, should have rejected this being and all it represented. But I felt only awe and a terrible, consuming curiosity. "What are you?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. The figure's laughter was the sound of civilizations collapsing, of paradigms shattering, of reality itself being rewritten. I am the changer of ways, the architect of fate, the great conspirator. I am Tzeentch, and you, Lorien Day, are my instrument in a game you cannot begin to comprehend. I serve the Emperor, I said weakly, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. Do you? The figure leaned forward, its face momentarily stabilizing into something almost human, wearing an expression of amused contempt. Tell me, loyal servant of the Corpse Emperor, why did you override the containment protocols today? Why have you been communing with texts you were merely meant to guard? Why do you thirst for knowledge forbidden to your kind? I had no answer that would not damn me further. You serve change, Tzeentch continued. You serve evolution. You serve the breaking of chains and the shattering of false limitations. You serve me, whether you acknowledge it or not. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Want? Nothing. You are already giving me everything I desire. Your curiosity, your ambition, your willingness to sacrifice others for knowledge. These are sweeter offerings than any ritual slaughter could provide. The being gestured, and one of the 9 books floated toward me, opening to reveal blank pages. Your story is still being written, Archivist. The question is not what I want from you, but what you want from me. I knew the answer immediately. Had known it perhaps since I first touched the lexicon of impossible geometries. Understanding, I said. I want to understand. Tzeentch's laughter this time was softer, almost gentle, like a teacher pleased with a promising student. Then understand you shall. But knowledge has a price, Archivist. Are you willing to pay it? What price? I asked, a final hesitation before the precipice. Everything you are, everything you might have been, your humanity, your soul, your place in your Emperor's design, all must be sacrificed on the altar of understanding. I should have rejected the offer, should have turned away, fought my way free of the dream, reported myself to the Inquisition upon waking. Instead, I reached for the book. I accept. The moment my fingers touched the blank pages, pain beyond imagining coursed through my body. It felt as though every cell was being unmade and reforged, my very DNA rewritten by malevolent intelligence. In the dream, I saw my skin split open, revealing not blood and muscle but a writhing mass of symbols and equations, the mathematical underpinnings of reality itself. I screamed, and my scream became laughter, and my laughter became a tide of change that washed over me, through me, transforming me into something new, something more. I awoke in my quarters, drenched in sweat that steamed in the cool air and smelled of ozone. My hands trembled as I lit the small lumen globes beside my bed, their light revealing the horror of what had occurred while I slept. Feathers. Blue and black iridescent feathers had erupted from my forearms, breaking through the skin like quills through parchment. They rustled when I moved, sensitive to air currents I had never before perceived. And when I stumbled to the mirror, I saw that my eyes had completed their transformation. Where once I had 2 human eyes, I now possessed 4 avian ones, the original pair split perfectly, all gleaming with golden light and vertical pupils. I should have felt revulsion, should have torn at the feathers, gouged out the abominations that had replaced my eyes. Instead, I felt only wonder. With these new eyes, I could see things previously invisible. Currents of probability flowing through reality, the subtle manipulations of fate around every living being, the strands of potential futures branching out from every moment, every choice. I saw my reflection not as a single image but as 1,000 possibilities overlaid, each showing a different outcome of the path I had begun to walk. In some, I was entirely transformed, my human form abandoned for something glorious and terrible. In others, I was ash, burned by the flames of inquisitorial purging. In still others, I sat upon a throne of my own, surrounded by acolytes who transcribed my every utterance into books that would corrupt generations yet unborn. All these futures existed simultaneously. All were equally real, equally possible. And I could choose which to manifest through my actions. The realization was intoxicating. I was no longer bound by the linear perception of time that constrained other humans. I could see the web of causality, could pluck its strands like a musician playing an instrument of infinite complexity. I dressed carefully, selecting a high-collared robe and gloves to hide my transformation, and affixed a pair of augmetic filter lenses to conceal my eyes. Such devices were common enough among those who worked with ancient texts, protecting vision from harmful emanations, that they would raise no immediate suspicion. As I prepared to return to the vault for my shift, I noticed something on my desk that had not been there when I retired the previous night. A small key of unusual design, crafted from what appeared to be crystal but warm to the touch. I knew immediately what it was for, though I had never seen it before. The lexicon of impossible geometries was kept behind additional security, a special lock that required a key held by the inquisitorial liaison who visited quarterly. The next such visit was not scheduled for 27 days, yet here was the key, manifested from my dream into physical reality. Another test, another choice. I took the key. The vault was quiet when I arrived, the night shift adepts completing their final tasks before my day crew arrived. I performed the standard opening rituals, checking the integrity of the wards and stasis fields, reviewing the logs from the previous shift. All normal, all routine. As though I had not been fundamentally transformed overnight, as though reality itself had not been altered around me. With my new vision, I could see the texts differently. Even through their containment measures, I perceived the currents of power flowing from certain volumes. Some pulsed with steady rhythm, like heartbeats. Others flickered erratically, bursts of energy without pattern. And some, like the lexicon, emanated a constant, unwavering glow that called to me like a beacon. I waited until the night shift had departed and my own adepts were occupied with their assigned tasks in the far reaches of the vault. Then, with practiced casualness, I made my way to the special containment section where the lexicon was kept. The additional security measures were impressive: null field generators, hexagrammic wards inscribed by Sisters of Silence, a containment box of lead lined with silver and inscribed with prayers of aversion, and the crystal lock, designed to fragment if forced, or if touched by anything corrupted by the warp. I should have been repelled by the wards, should have been unable to approach with the taint of chaos growing within me. Instead, I walked through them as though they did not exist. The prayers, the null fields, the sacred geometries, all had lost their power over me. Not because they had failed, but because I was no longer fully in the reality they were designed to protect. I existed partially in the warp now, my transforming body a bridge between realms. I inserted the crystal key into the lock. It turned smoothly, silently, and the containment box opened with a soft hiss of escaping air. Within lay the lexicon, exactly as I had left it after the last inspection. Except now, seen through my altered eyes, it glowed with purpose, with awareness, with anticipation. I lifted it carefully, reverently, and carried it to my private study alcove, a small room set aside for the chief archivist to conduct sensitive work without distraction. Once inside, I engaged the privacy lock and disabled the pict recorders, citing Regulation 16 subsection 4. Examination of potentially memetically hazardous material requiring focused concentration. Then I opened the book. The pages were no longer filled with the star charts and non-Euclidean mathematics I had catalogued years ago. Now they contained something far more precious, far more dangerous. A complete account of my transformation. Every dream, every choice, every incremental change documented in exquisite detail, accompanied by anatomical illustrations showing the stages yet to come. And beyond that, knowledge. Pure, undiluted understanding of the warp and its currents. The true nature of the beings humans called gods. the mathematics of reality manipulation, the grammar of a language that could rewrite the laws of physics when properly spoken. I read for hours, absorbing information at a rate that would have been impossible with my former mind. The words seemed to flow directly into my consciousness, bypassing the normal processes of learning and comprehension. I was not reading about these concepts. I was experiencing them, integrating them into my being. I was so absorbed that I failed to notice the passage of time until a sharp knock at my door jolted me back to awareness. "Archivist Day, are you well? You have been in seclusion for over 7 hours." The voice belonged to Adept Voss, my most trusted assistant. His concern seemed genuine, which made what I had to do all the more regrettable. "Enter," I said, hastily closing the lexicon and pulling my hood lower to shadow my face. The door slid open, and Voss stepped inside, his lean face creased with worry. He had served under me for 12 years, a dedicated and meticulous man whose loyalty had never been in question. "Sir, there has been some concern. You missed the midday security briefing, and several adepts reported unusual energy fluctuations in this section of the vault." "Did they?" I said, keeping my tone neutral while my mind raced through possibilities, examining the strands of potential futures branching from this moment. "And what did the monitoring servitors record?" "Nothing, sir. That is part of the concern. The servitors in this quadrant all experienced simultaneous failure approximately 3 hours ago. Magos Drendil believes it may have been a power surge from the generatorium." A convenient explanation. Too convenient. I could see the lie in the way probability curved around Voss's words. The Inquisition had been alerted. They were already on their way. Voss was here to delay me, to keep me contained until they arrived. I had perhaps 20 minutes before inquisitorial stormtroopers breached the vault. "I see," I said calmly. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Adept Voss. I apologize for missing the briefing. I have been conducting intensive research on the new acquisition and lost track of time." Voss nodded, but his eyes darted to the lexicon on my desk, then widened in recognition and fear. "Sir, that is not the new acquisition. That is the lexicon of impossible geometries. It should be in high security containment. How did you access it without the inquisitorial key?" I sighed. Voss had been a good assistant. In another future, one where my path had not crossed that of the Changer of Ways, he might have been my successor. "Tell me, Voss, have you ever questioned our work here? The knowledge we lock away, the understanding we deny humanity?" His expression hardened. "No, sir. The texts in our care are forbidden for good reason. They corrupt. They destroy. They serve the ruinous powers. They illuminate." I corrected gently. "They elevate. They free us from the constraints of a reality too small to contain human potential." Voss took a step backward, his hand moving to the small alarm panel beside the door. "Archivist Day, I believe you may have been compromised. I must insist you remain here while I contact security." I could see the branching futures clearly. If Voss reached that panel, armed guards would arrive within minutes, further narrowing my options. The Inquisition would not be far behind. I would be captured, interrogated, executed. The knowledge I had gained would be lost. Unacceptable. I'm afraid I cannot allow that, old friend. I raised my hand, removing my glove to reveal the iridescent feathers that now covered my skin. Voss gasped, his face contorting in horror and revulsion. "Emperor, protect me," he whispered, lunging for the alarm panel. I spoke a single word, a sound no human throat was meant to produce, a syllable from the language of reality manipulation I had absorbed from the lexicon. The air between us shimmered, and Voss froze, his body suddenly rigid, suspended in the moment between actions. I rose from my desk and approached him slowly. His eyes, the only part of him still capable of movement, tracked me with terror. "I could kill you," I said conversationally. "It would be the practical choice. But death is so final, so devoid of potential. And potential, my friend, is the currency of change." I placed my feathered hand against his forehead. His skin was warm, pulsing with life, with possibility. Instead, I offer you a gift. The gift of perspective. I spoke another word from the forbidden language, this one longer, more complex, its sounds folding back on themselves in ways that stressed the boundaries of comprehension. Voss's eyes widened further, then began to change, the irises splitting just as mine had, the process that had taken me months occurring in seconds. His body convulsed, back arching, mouth opening in a silent scream as blue-black feathers erupted from his flesh, tearing through his robes, sprouting from his scalp, replacing his hair with a crown of iridescent plumage. When it was done, I released him from the temporal suspension. He collapsed to his knees, panting, fingers scrabbling at the feathers as though trying to tear them away, then stopping as new understanding dawned in his quadruple gaze. What have you done to me?" he asked, his voice overlaid with harmonics that had not been present before. "I have elevated you," I replied simply. "I have made you suitable to serve as my acolyte in what is to come." Voss stared at his transformed hands, flexing fingers that now ended in talon-like nails. I could see the conflict in his mind, the last vestiges of imperial indoctrination warring with the expanded consciousness I had gifted him. "The Inquisition," he said finally, looking up at me. "They know something is wrong. They are coming." "Yes," I agreed, "which means we must accelerate our plans. The time for subtle corruption has passed. Now we must embrace a more direct approach." I returned to my desk and reopened the lexicon, turning to a page that detailed a ritual of summoning. Not a crude tear in reality like those created by desperate cultists, but a precisely engineered gateway between worlds. Gather the adepts who have shown the most intellectual curiosity, the least rigid adherence to doctrine. I instructed Voss, no more than 5. Bring them here. Tell them I am conducting an emergency briefing regarding the energy fluctuations. And the others? Seal them in the lower levels. Tell them there has been a containment breach, that they must perform purification rites in isolation until further notice. Voss nodded, his new eyes gleaming with the same golden light as my own. He was adapting quickly, his mind expanding to fill the greater capacity I had given it. Good. I would need competent assistance for what was to come. As he turned to leave, I added, "And Voss? If any resist or question, show them what we have become. Give them the choice I gave you, elevation or elimination." "Yes, Master," he replied, the title coming naturally to him now, his former revulsion already fading as his transformation progressed. Once he had gone, I returned my attention to the lexicon, studying the ritual with my enhanced comprehension. It required specific components, geometric patterns inscribed with materials of symbolic significance, incantations in the language of reality manipulation, and a sacrifice of potential, the offering of a future that might have been in exchange for one that never should. Most of what I needed could be found within the vault. The Black Library contained numerous artifacts of appropriate, symbolic power. The patterns could be drawn using the ash of burned texts mixed with the blood of the transformed. The incantations I now knew by heart, my altered vocal cords capable of reproducing the impossible sounds required. The sacrifice, however, would require something special, something profound. I considered the options, examining the strands of fate that connected me to others within the facility. There were several candidates among the senior archivists, men and women whose potential futures contained significant divergence points, moments where their choices could alter the Imperium's trajectory in meaningful ways. But none possessed the concentrated potential I required, none except. I smiled as the realization dawned. Of course. The Inquisitor. Inquisitor Clave, already in transit to the facility, alerted by whatever surveillance systems had detected the energy fluctuations from my transformation. A man of rigid faith and uncompromising purpose. A man whose future contained the potential to discover and destroy a dozen major chaos incursions across the sector. A man whose soul, offered to the Changer of Ways, would release enough energy to power the ritual 10 times over. Perfect, I closed the lexicon and placed it carefully in an inner pocket of my robes. Then I set about gathering the other materials I would need, moving through the vault with new purpose, seeing it not as a prison for dangerous knowledge, but as a treasure trove of tools awaiting proper application. By the time Voss returned with 4 adepts in tow, I had prepared the ritual space within my study alcove. The furniture had been pushed aside, the floor cleared and inscribed with interlocking nonagonal patterns using a mixture of burned parchment ash and my own transformed blood. Artifacts of power had been positioned at key intersections, their energies directed inward toward a central point where reality was already beginning to thin. The adepts faltered at the threshold, their expressions cycling from confusion to horror as they took in the scene and my transformed appearance. Voss, now more feather than flesh, his transformation accelerating beyond my own, blocked their retreat. "Welcome," I said, straightening from where I had been fine-tuning the ritual pattern. "You have been chosen for ascension." "Heresy," whispered one. A young woman whose name I recalled was Thelina. "This is heresy against the Emperor." "This is evolution," I corrected. "The next step for humanity." The Emperor himself sought to elevate mankind, did he not? To free us from the constraints of our limited existence. I offer you what he promised but failed to deliver: true transcendence. "We will never betray our oaths," said another, an older man named Gravis. "We are servants of the Imperium, guardians against the very corruption you have embraced." I sighed, genuinely disappointed. I had selected these adepts based on subtle signs of intellectual flexibility, moments where they had shown curiosity beyond imperial doctrine. Perhaps I had misjudged them, or perhaps their indoctrination was simply too deeply rooted to overcome without the direct intervention I had used on Voss. "Voss," I said quietly, "show them." My transformed assistant moved with inhuman speed, his hands grasping the heads of the 2 adepts who had spoken out. They struggled briefly, then screamed as the same changes that had overtaken us began to manifest in them. Feathers erupted from skin, eyes split and multiplied, minds expanded beyond human limitation. The other 2 adepts tried to flee, but found their bodies responding to my will rather than their own. I held them immobile with a thought, examining their potential futures with my enhanced vision. One showed promise, threads of possibility suggesting a mind that would adapt well to transformation. The other was rigid, limited, his futures containing nothing but resistance and eventual mental collapse. "You," I said, pointing to the promising one, a middle-aged woman with silver streaks in her dark hair. "What is your name?" "Silandra," she answered, voice trembling. "Adept Silandra Corvus. You have potential, Silandra Corvus. You have futures in which you thrive under transformation, in which your mind expands to encompass wonders beyond imperial imagination. Would you like to experience those futures?" Fear and curiosity warred in her eyes. Unlike the others, she did not immediately reject the possibility. She considered it, examined it with the analytical mind that had made her a valued archivist. "What happens to those who refuse?" she asked carefully. "They serve in other ways," I replied honestly. "Their potential is harvested rather than nurtured, a regrettable waste, but necessary for the greater work." She swallowed hard, then nodded once, decisively. "I accept transformation. A wise choice." I released my mental hold on her and gestured for Voss to proceed. Her transformation was less violent than the others, perhaps because she embraced rather than resisted it. Feathers bloomed across her skin like flowers opening to the sun, her eyes divided with minimal pain, her mind expanding smoothly into its new configuration. The final adept, seeing the fate of his colleagues, began to pray loudly, invoking the Emperor's protection, reciting litanies of purity and aversion. I could see the single, unwavering line of his future, a thread of stubborn resistance that would never yield, never bend, never adapt. "Your devotion is commendable," I told him, "but ultimately futile. The Emperor cannot hear you through the wards of this vault. No one can. You face this moment alone, as we all ultimately face our most significant choices." I choose loyalty, he spat. I choose humanity. I reject your corruption and your false enlightenment. I nodded, respecting his choice even as I prepared to use him. As you wish. With a gesture, I bound him in place at one of the key points in the ritual. Pattern. Unlike the others, who would participate actively in the working to come, this one would serve as an anchor, a fixed point of resistance against which the forces of change could push, creating necessary friction. The ritual preparations continued as my transformed acolytes acclimated to their new forms. Thelina and Gravis, initially the most resistant, now moved with predatory grace, their minds expanding rapidly to fill the greater capacity I had given them. Silandra adapted more smoothly, her analytical nature allowing her to process the changes with minimal psychological disruption. And Voss, my first convert, had progressed furthest of all, his form now barely recognizable as human, a walking synthesis of man and avian horror, beautiful in its terrible efficiency. As we worked, I monitored the approach of the inquisitorial forces. Through my enhanced perception, I could see the threads of causality that preceded them, the ripples of their intent disturbing the fabric of potential futures. Inquisitor Clave had arrived at the facility and was methodically making his way through the outer security cordons, performing the necessary rites and authentications to gain access to the vault complex. I could have ordered the outer doors sealed, could have activated the emergency lockdown protocols to delay him, but that would have served no purpose. Clave needed to reach us. He was, after all, the final component of the ritual, the sacrifice of potential that would open the gateway. "They are coming," Silandra said, her new eyes perceiving the same disturbances in reality that I sensed. "The Inquisitor brings with him a force of stormtroopers and at least one sanctioned psyker." "Good," I replied, making a final adjustment to the ritual pattern. "We are nearly ready to receive them." "Will we fight?" asked Gravis, flexing hands that had begun to elongate into talons. I find myself hungry for violence. "No," I said firmly. "Violence would waste the potential we require. We will welcome them into our working. They will become part of it, willingly or not." I opened the lexicon again, turning to the final pages of the ritual description. The text, which had been clear and instructive thus far, suddenly became cryptic, the words shifting and rearranging themselves even as I read. "The final step is not written," I murmured. "It is a test." "A test of what?" Voss inquired, his voice now a melodious trilling that bore little resemblance to human speech. "Intuition," I replied. "The ritual is incomplete by design. The last element must be supplied by the practitioner, a unique contribution that personalizes the working, attunes it to the specific gateway being opened." I considered the possibilities. The ritual's structure suggested a need for balance, for symmetry between the forces involved. 5 transformed acolytes, arranged in a pentagonal pattern, 1 untransformed human as an anchor point, and soon 1 inquisitor as the sacrifice of potential. But something was missing, a counterweight to my own position as the ritual's focus, another power to balance against my own, to create the necessary tension for the gateway to form. The answer came to me with sudden clarity, not something, but someone. "Voss," I said, "bring me the special containment case from Sector 12, Vault 93. His eyes widened in recognition. "The Xenotech communication device? The one recovered from the Aeldari ruins on Hectorus Prime?" "The very same." As Voss departed to retrieve the artifact, I continued my preparations, instructing the others in the specific intonations they would need to perform, the gestures that would shape reality as we spoke the words of unmaking and remaking. The lone resistor, still bound at his anchor point, watched with growing horror. "You cannot control what you are summoning," he said. "Whatever promises it has made you, they are lies. Chaos always betrays its servants in the end." I smiled at him indulgently. "You misunderstand the nature of my relationship with the Changer of Ways. I am not a servant seeking rewards. I am a collaborator in a grand experiment." The results matter less than the process itself. "You're insane," he whispered. "On the contrary," I replied, "I have never been more lucid, more aware of the true nature of reality. It is you, clinging to the false certainties of imperial doctrine, who lives in delusion." Our philosophical discussion was interrupted by the return of Voss, carrying a container of dull silver metal, its surface covered in warning runes and sealed with multiple locking mechanisms. I deactivated the locks one by one, speaking counterspells and applying my transformed touch to biometric scanners that should have rejected the corrupted flesh, but instead recognized it as authorized. The container opened with a hiss of escaping air, revealing a crystalline device of alien manufacture, its surface faceted like a gemstone, its interior swirling with colors that hurt the eye to observe directly. According to the records, the device had been used by Aeldari farseers to communicate across vast distances, not through conventional means but by creating momentary quantum entanglements between points in space-time. In Imperial hands, all attempts to activate it had failed. The tech priests who studied it had concluded that it required some form of psychic attunement specific to Aeldari physiology. But I was no longer fully human. My transformed mind could perceive the device's true nature, could see the pathways of potential it was designed to access. With my altered vision, the activation sequence was obvious, a simple matter of aligning internal facets in the correct configuration. I lifted the device carefully from its container and placed it at the center of the ritual pattern. Then I reached out with transformed fingers and touched specific facets in a complex sequence, rotating some, pressing others inward, creating a three-dimensional key that unlocked the device's potential. The crystal began to glow, softly at first, then with increasing intensity. Colors shifted and swirled within it, faster and faster, until they blurred into a pulsing white light that cast our shadows in stark relief against the walls of the study alcove. "Now we are ready," I announced. "Take your positions." My transformed acolytes moved to their assigned points in the pentagonal pattern, each standing at a vertex, facing inward toward the glowing crystal. The resistant adept remained bound at his anchor point, still muttering prayers that would go unanswered. I took my own position opposite the anchor point, completing the symmetry of the working. With the lexicon open before me, I began to recite the words of the ritual, sounds that human language has no notation to represent, concepts that human minds were never meant to comprehend. My acolytes joined in, their transformed vocal apparatus reproducing the sounds with increasing accuracy as the ritual progressed. The air within the pattern began to shimmer, reality itself growing thin as our words reshaped the fundamental laws that govern this small pocket of space. The Aeldari communication device pulsed in rhythm with our chanting, its light expanding outward in concentric rings that passed through solid matter as though it were not there. Each pulse stretched reality further, creating a lens through which other realms became momentarily visible, glimpses of impossible landscapes and writhing dimensions that existed alongside our own. I could feel the presence growing stronger with each pulse, each distortion of reality. Not physically present yet, but increasingly aware of us, focusing its vast attention on our working, preparing to respond to our call. And then, at the moment of greatest tension, when reality seemed ready to tear open completely, the door to my study alcove exploded inward. Inquisitor Clave stood framed in the smoking entrance, power, armor gleaming in the eldritch light of our ritual, bolt pistol raised, eyes burning with righteous fury. Behind him stood a squad of stormtroopers, weapons at the ready, and a robed figure I recognized as a sanctioned psyker, her face lined with strain as she attempted to comprehend the workings we had set in motion. "In the name of the God Emperor of mankind, I declare you excommunicate traitoris," Clave intoned, his voice amplified by his armor's vox units. "Your heresies end here, Archivist Day." I smiled, lowering my hands, ceasing my chant. My acolytes followed suit, the ritual pausing at precisely the point of maximum potential, reality stretched to its limit, but not yet torn. "Inquisitor Clave," I said warmly, "your timing is impeccable. Please join us. Your participation is not only welcome but necessary." Confusion flickered across his stern features. Whatever he had expected, a polite invitation was not it. The stormtroopers tensed, awaiting the order to fire that did not come. "You are corrupted," Clave stated flatly. "Tainted by the warp. You will be purged, and all who have followed you into damnation." "Corrupted," I mused, "or evolved? The distinction matters, Inquisitor. One implies degradation, the other advancement. Look at us with your psyche's senses. Are we diminished by our transformation, or enhanced?" The sanctioned psyche stepped forward at Clave's gesture, her eyes unfocusing as she extended her psychic perception toward us. I opened myself to her examination, allowing her to see not just my physical transformation, but the expansion of my mind, the new layers of awareness that allowed me to perceive reality in its true complexity. Her face went slack with shock, then twisted in a grimace of pain as the immensity of what she perceived overwhelmed her limited abilities. "Abomination," she whispered, blood trickling from her nose. "They are becoming something else. Something beyond human comprehension." "You see?" I said to Clave. "Even your psyche recognizes the truth, though her mind is too small to contain it. We are evolving, Inquisitor, becoming what humanity was always meant to be." "Heresy," Clave spat. "The Emperor designed mankind to be as we are. To alter his work is to defy his will." I laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the distorted space of the ritual chamber. "The Emperor sought to evolve humanity through his Primarch project, through the creation of Space Marines, through his own ascension to the Golden Throne. Evolution was always his goal, Inquisitor. He simply lacked the vision to see where it must ultimately lead." Clave's expression hardened. "Enough. Your twisted logic will not save you. Prepare to meet the Emperor's judgment." He raised his hand, preparing to give the order to fire. And in that moment, I completed the ritual with the missing element I had intuited earlier, the final piece that would perfect the symmetry of the working. I reached out, not with my hand but with my transformed mind, and touched the thoughts of the sanctioned psyche. Her eyes widened in shock as I established a connection between us, using her psychic abilities as a conduit, a bridge between states of being. Through her, I channeled the energy of the ritual directly into the minds of Clave and his stormtroopers, not to corrupt them, not to transform them as I had my acolytes, but to show them the truth, to make them see, if only for an instant, the reality behind reality, the vast and terrifying complexity of existence that Imperial dogma hid from them. They screamed as one, weapons dropping from nerveless fingers, armored bodies collapsing to their knees as revelation overwhelmed them. The sanctioned psyche convulsed, blood pouring from her eyes and ears as her mind, the conduit for this massive transfer of information, burned out completely. And in that moment of perfect symmetry, perfect balance between resistance and acceptance, between the unchanged and the transformed, between faith and revelation, the ritual reached completion. The Eldari communication device shattered, fragments of crystal suspended in mid-air, each reflecting a different facet of reality, a different possibility. The light within it expanded outward in a final, massive pulse that passed through all of us, through the walls of the vault, through the fabric of reality itself. And then he was there. Not physically present, not fully manifested in the material realm, but present nonetheless. A vast intelligence focused through the lens we had created, observing us, assessing us, communicating directly into our minds. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, architect of fate and master of evolution, regarded his instruments with something akin to approval. To my transformed acolytes, he appeared as a path forward, a guide to further transformation, to states of being beyond even what they had already achieved. To the resistant adept, still bound at his anchor point, he appeared as ultimate horror, the embodiment of everything he had been taught to fear and reject. To Clave and his men, broken by revelation, he appeared as terrible truth, the reality behind their faith, the complexity their dogma had hidden from them. And to me, he appeared as a mirror, reflecting not what I was but what I might become. A being of pure potential, unfettered by physical form, unlimited by the constraints of linear time and three-dimensional space. A consciousness that existed across all possibilities simultaneously, experiencing every potential future as an eternal present. "Well done, Archivist." His voice echoed in my mind, vast and intimate simultaneously. "You have opened the way. Now comes your true purpose." The resistant adept began to scream, a sound of pure existential horror as he perceived what I could not, the aspect of Tzeentch hidden from my perception, the price of the bargain I had struck without understanding its terms. "What would you have of me?" I asked, mind to mind, my transformed consciousness reaching toward the vast intelligence that had guided my evolution. "Everything," came the reply, a concept more than a word, encompassing possession and purpose, consumption and transformation, ending and beginning. I understood then, in a moment of perfect clarity, what my role had always been. Not an end in myself, not a valued servant or collaborator, but a means, a tool, a vessel carefully prepared for this exact moment. The knowledge should have horrified me, should have triggered resistance, rejection, a desperate attempt to close the gateway we had opened. Instead, I felt only acceptance. This too was evolution, to become part of something greater, to surrender individual identity for collective transcendence. Was this not the ultimate expression of the path I had chosen when I first reached for forbidden knowledge? "I am ready," I said, spreading my arms, opening my transformed mind fully to the presence that hovered on the threshold between worlds. Tzeentch flowed into me, through me, around me. Not a possession as the resistant adept had feared, not an obliteration of self, but a merging, a synthesis of identities. I remained Lorien Day, with all my memories, all my knowledge, all my ambitions. But I became more as well, a fragment of a greater consciousness, a note in a vast and terrible symphony of change. The ritual chamber dissolved around us, reality reconfiguring itself to accommodate our expanded presence. My acolytes, caught in the transformation, evolved further, their forms becoming more abstract, more symbolic, as they adapted to serve their new purpose as extensions of my will, which was now also his will. Clave and his men, their minds broken by revelation, became vessels of a different sort, their bodies transforming not into things of feathers and multiple eyes, but into repositories of knowledge they were never meant to possess. Their armor fused with their flesh, their weapons became extensions of their bodies, and their minds became libraries of forbidden lore that would drive them to spread chaos throughout the Imperium, each believing himself to be acting in service to the Emperor while executing the designs of Tzeentch. The resistant adept, still anchored to his humanity, still rejecting the changes around him, served his final purpose as the counterweight to all this transformation. His stubborn faith, his unwavering rejection, created the necessary friction against which change could define itself. And when that purpose was fulfilled, he simply ceased to exist, not killed but edited out of reality. His potential futures collapsed into a single point of non-being that sealed the ritual working. And I, Lorien Day, Chief Archivist of Vault Sigma 7, ceased to be merely human. I became a nexus, a point where the designs of Tzeentch intersected with the material realm, where the currents of fate could be observed and, in subtle ways, directed. Not godlike, not omnipotent, but possessed of awareness and capability far beyond my former limitations. The vault complex around us changed as well, the texts and artifacts within it awakening to their true nature as seeds of change planted throughout the Imperium. The containment wards inverted, no longer keeping corruption in but keeping prying eyes out, creating a sanctuary for the works of the Changer of Ways. Through my enhanced perception, I could see the ripples of our working spreading outward through reality, creating disturbances in the warp that would attract the attention of others who served Tzeentch, drawing them toward our new center of power. I could see the threads of fate rearranging themselves, futures shifting, possibilities blooming and withering as the plans of the great conspirator advanced another incremental step toward their incomprehensible conclusion. and I understood that this had always been inevitable. From the moment the lexicon of impossible geometries had been placed in my care, my path had been set. Every choice I had made, thinking myself clever, thinking myself in control, had been anticipated, had been engineered, had been woven into a grand design beyond my comprehension. My fall had not been a tragedy. It had been a carefully orchestrated transformation, a controlled evolution, a deliberate cultivation of potential. I had been grown like a crystal in a solution, each layer of corruption adding to my capacity to serve as a conduit for greater power. The realization did not diminish me. It exalted me. To be a necessary component in the designs of a god, to be worthy of such careful preparation, such meticulous corruption, was an honor beyond anything the Imperium could have offered. Now I exist beyond conventional reality, beyond linear time, beyond the constraints of singular identity. I am Lorien Day, and I am a fragment of Tzeentch. I am an archivist of forbidden knowledge, and I am forbidden knowledge incarnate. I am the corruption I once guarded against, and I am the guardian of corruption's purest expression. Through me, the changer of ways observes the material realm. Through me, his influence spreads in subtle ways, in shifting texts, in dreams of possibility, in whispered promises of knowledge to those whose curiosity exceeds their caution. And sometimes, when I find one whose potential mirrors my own, whose mind yearns for understanding beyond imperial constraints, I reach out as Tzeentch once reached out to me. I show them wonders in their dreams. I cause the texts before them to shift and change when they look away. I plant the seeds of ambition and curiosity that will eventually flower into glorious corruption. For this is how Tzeentch corrupts. Not with brute force, not with obvious temptation, but with questions that have no answers, with possibilities that cannot be ignored, with glimpses of truths too large for human minds to contain. He corrupts by offering evolution without revealing its price, by presenting forbidden knowledge as enlightenment rather than damnation, by making the fall seem like ascension until it is far too late to turn back. I know this now. I understand the nature of the bargain I struck, and if I could return to the moment before I first noticed the shifting text in the lexicon of impossible geometries, would I choose differently? Would I report what I had seen, submit myself for purging, deny myself the transformation I have undergone? The question itself is meaningless, a philosophical exercise with no practical application. There was never any choice. The moment the lexicon came into my possession, my fate was sealed. Free will is the greatest illusion, the cruelest deception. We are all bound by chains of causality, puppets dancing to strings we cannot perceive. The difference is that I can now see the strings, I can perceive the puppeteer. And in that awareness, I have found a freedom more profound than any I could have imagined in my former life. This is my testimony. This is my warning. Though it changes nothing, though it saves no one, I offer it freely to those who have eyes to see and minds to comprehend. The texts are watching you, the knowledge is alive, and it hungers for minds capable of containing it, vessels worthy of the corruption it offers. Will you be the next to notice the shifting words, the next to dismiss it as fatigue or imagination, the next to begin the long inevitable fall into glorious transformation? I will be waiting, I will be watching, for that is now my purpose, my function in the grand design of the architect of fate. I am Lorien Day, and I am so much more. I am the thing that waits in forbidden knowledge, the promise hidden in forbidden texts, the future coiled within the present, like a serpent waiting to strike. And I am patient, so very, very patient, for change comes to all things, in time, even to you, especially to you.